AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Sarah Peyton, is back with us today to talk about how to reclaim your abandoned self. Sarah is an author, a certified trainer of nonviolent communication, and a neuroscience educator who integrates brain science and the use of resonant language to heal trauma. She brings together depth work and self-compassion that integrate interpersonal neurobiology with the transformative potential of nonviolent communications empathy. Welcome back to AVAIYA, Sarah.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here with you, Andy.
Yeah, always great to see you. And now we have another great topic to discuss today. So
Really great.
yeah, another big struggle for a lot of people. Let's get started with first talking about alarmed aloneness. So this is something we've talked about a little bit before, but can you refresh our memory? What is alarmed aloneness?
Well, and it's particularly applicable when we're talking about our abandoned self. So the first thing that I want to say is that one of the things that happens really often for people when they've been abandoned is that they don't actually want to go get their abandoned self. They have this sense of like, if I go, then nobody else will come. They want the person who originally abandoned them to come back. And they'll often like stand on their integrity, like, no, I don't want to do this. This is not mine to do. I was abandoned. And I think the very first thing we need to do is just to acknowledge that the abandonment was real. To say, yes, it's true, it happened. And yes, it's true, those traumatized people who abandoned us, whether they were parents or grandparents or whether they were partners or whoever it was, best friends, whoever it was that headed for the hills, leaving us behind, that this really happened and it really has an impact on us. So I just wanted to kind of set this stage to acknowledge and name that particular wrinkle. Like, I will not turn toward myself in order to make sure somebody else comes to get me. And, you know, for our little brains, which are experiencing, now to come to your question, alarmed aloneness, our little brains need us. They need us to start to kind of awaken the part of ourselves that can reach. I have this wonderful graphic that shows the prefrontal cortex reaching for the amygdala to put its arms around the amygdala and say, "Oh, my honey, you're with me. We are here." So a lot of my work kind of circles around this. Now, we have in English a common phrase, fight, flight, freeze. And this common phrase implies that when we get upset, we're either angry or scared. And then when things get really bad, that we immobilize. And it's true, we do immobilize, but the limitation of the phrase fight, flight doesn't let us acknowledge in the English language that our little bodies become totally alarmed, and they're not afraid and they're not angry. There can be elements of both fear and anger, but the major stressor for the little bodies that are left and abandoned is the experience of the other person being gone. It's like, where is that other person? It's a cry, you know, in our infant self, it's a cry for mom. In our older self, it's a cry for a partner or someone who has died or a child that has died. I mean, that we are torn, we are literally torn apart. Our heart changes shape. Our heart changes shape. We can see it on MRIs in the aftermath of a great loss, because the feeling of a heartbreak, it's like reflected in physical structural changes in the heart. Now, with a little bit of time, people's hearts usually go back to normal, their normal shape, it's like a shock reaction for the heart. So this is a little bit about alarmed aloneness, that it exists and that there's a part of ourselves that needs us.
Beautiful. Everything you just said was so amazing. And I'm so glad you started us off saying what you said about how we don't want to go back and reclaim or whatever that abandoned child. And so many of us, want that, the other person, the parent, the whoever that left, to come back for us. And we got to come back for ourselves, right? That's so key. So to dive a little deeper into alarmed aloneness, you talked a little bit about it, how it can affect like literally our hearts. What are some other effects of alarmed aloneness on a child specifically?
Alarmed aloneness on a child is like, so the body has messages that need to be decoded. They need to be decoded relationally, either in relationship with ourselves or in relationship with others. So if I'm having a really bad time and I see you, and you even just do a facial expression that lets me know that you get what I went through, we've decoded it together. That there's some of that message from the body that can move through. But the thing about our world and our language is that we rarely name alarmed aloneness. We can call it abandonment. That's why I was so glad you were doing this workshop, because, it's real. It's a real thing for us social humans to lose somebody that's important to us. And so what alarmed aloneness does to a child, if it's unnamed and never accompanied, never brought into the relational space, never decoded, is that the body can stay in a state of anxiety for decades. Before COVID, I would travel the world and talk about this, and people would say, the most important thing that you've taught me is about alarmed aloneness. They'll say, I have been in alarmed aloneness for 6 decades, and it's never been named before. It's never been able to move out of my body. So part of what we're doing, you and I together in this moment, is we're saying to everybody who's listening, have you experienced alarmed aloneness? Do you need some acknowledgement? Would it be sweet if someone else understood how much alarmed aloneness you've lived with? And that then can calm a certain level of anxiety that's always been present because the feeling has never been named. So one of the after effects of alarmed aloneness is persistent chronic anxiety. Also, all of the experiences of self-criticism, lacerating self-criticism, self-hate, self-disgust, self-scorn, self-loathing, all that stuff is a sign of alarmed aloneness. Because when we're in alarmed aloneness, we're longing for there to be support and connection. And in our world, that's often shamed. And so then we've got the layer of alarmed aloneness, but then we have a layer of shame on top of that. And then in order to deal with the shame, we turn away from ourselves. So we've got the abandoned self, and then we have the shame that the little one is experiencing distress in a world where such distress is not celebrated. And then we have this shame, and then the way we cope with it is then, if we just turn away from the abandoned self and leave the abandoned self behind, then everything's going to be okay. It's like, okay, we can leave that one behind. We can go forward, and we can just have a constant stream of self-hate at our own weakness and vulnerability, at wanting, at being needy, is one of the ways that we can kind of find that in ourselves. Do you believe that you're needy? If you believe you're needy, then you have the alarmed aloneness, the shame, and the self-contempt.
Thank you. Thank you for like demonstrating that. I think it was really actually very powerful that you moved in that direction, because that is showing us a physical representation of what we're doing on that, I guess, mental level. So why don't we talk a little bit about what resonance is next? What does resonance mean to you?
Well, we touched into it a little bit when I said that if I had a hard time with something and you had even a facial expression that indicated that you understood, then my body would start to relax. Resonance is the experience of somebody else getting us. of somebody else getting at least some element of the emotional experience that we've lived through, or the complexity or the nuances. Often it's the nuances that we need understood. Often people will be really simplistic in the way they respond. Oh, yeah, I bet you're angry, but you're not just angry. You're angry, you have alarmed aloneness, you have disgust, you have self-disgust. It's like this person has named one of the body messages that's there. And then they go off and do whatever they're doing. And you're like, oh, there's so much more. Yeah, but you don't know there's so much more until you start exploring the world of resonance. So resonance is the experience of being with somebody else in the relational brain. Another thing that I'd like to say about resonance is that if we think about musical instruments, I have a cello over here. If we think about musical instruments and the vibration that music makes, humans are like musical instruments. So if you have two cellos and you're playing one cello and the other cello is sitting beside, if you listen closely to the cello sitting beside, it's vibrating with the same musical resonance as the other cello. And our bodies are like that. We learn to stop it, but we're naturally resonant. And so as we begin to kind of enter the world of this work, we're opening the gates to intuition. We're opening the gates to allowing our bodies to give us information about the music, the emotional music that life is playing on another person, or that life is playing on ourselves. So in terms of reconnecting with the abandoned self, a part of what needs to happen to grow the neurons to catch the abandoned self is that we gradually begin to apprehend, to catch a glimpse of the enormity of the abandonment. We need to very slowly and gently grow the neurons that can catch the horror for the baby, or whatever age we were when we lost somebody. The horror of the emptiness and the aloneness. Sometimes it even comes close to a feeling of insanity. So of course, in terms of like abandoned self, shamed self, turning away self, of course, we can't just go directly there and go, oh, honey, because if we go directly there and go, honey, we open to an unfathomable pain. But if we go gradually, if we're like, okay, I can catch a glimpse of you, hon. I can catch a glimpse of the enormity that you lived through, of the hideous experience of aloneness that was a part of you, a parent turning away, a parent having no capacity, neglect, abuse, addiction, mental illness, incarceration. I can catch a glimpse of what it was like for you. And as we catch those glimpses with a resonant feeling body, we'll start to be able to move toward this abandoned self.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you. You always do such a beautiful job of explaining this. I'll tell you, we've had many conversations over the years, but it's just, I love it. So thank you. All right. Why don't we talk a little bit about time travel? I'm intrigued. What in this context does time travel mean?
Well, so this drawing that I have of I guess I would turn this way, of the prefrontal cortex reaching for the amygdala to put its arms around the amygdala is an opening, a door opening to the idea of time travel. The part of ourselves that knows we were abandoned, the part of ourselves that carries that pain is called the amygdala. And it carries the emotional memory and the knowledge of emotions. That's a part of our experience of living. And it carries all of the unresolved, unresonated with emotions that have lived in us in trauma bubbles in the amygdala. So the amygdala, in a way, can be seen as the abandoned self. And and what's so important to know about the amygdala and time travel is that the amygdala has no sense of time. So the abandoned self has no sense of time. The abandoned self is like, I am always abandoned, even though the main abandonment happened either, for example, when we were born, or when we were 3, or when we were 27 and a beloved partner died. our amygdala is like, I am still abandoned. I am living in abandonment. And a part of the reason the amygdala is living in abandonment is because it has no capacity to timestamp. Its neighbor, the hippocampus, has the capacity to timestamp. But in order to save our lives, the amygdala shuts down the hippocampus. So whenever there's an intensity that's too big to deal with, the amygdala slams the hippocampus with cortisol and blows all its fuses, and the hippocampus stops processing. So what happens when we take the prefrontal cortex, gradually turning toward the abandoned self and reaching, what begins to happen is, we can see this in MRIs, the amygdala starts to calm. And as the amygdala starts to calm, it stops blowing the fuses of the hippocampus. And the hippocampus gets to go, oh, I am not abandoned now. I was abandoned when I was 3. Oh, I can be with myself now. But until we start to hold the original experience with resonance, we can't awaken the hippocampus. We can't awaken the timestamping. So very important for our healing is the capacity to reach through time and space to the abandoned self and to begin a dialogue. Now, if this is of interest to you, this is a major subject of my book 1, Your Resonant Self, and then with contract work takes us into book 2, Your Resonant Self workbook. But and there are also many free meditations on my website that allow you to kind of go through this journey. There's a lot of support for this on my website.
Wonderful. Awesome. So you may have just kind of touched on this, Sarah, but what would be like the benefits of time travel? And I get you were talking about that a little bit. Anything else you want to say around like how it can help us?
Yes. As we begin to go, oh, my abandoned self was a 3-year-old person, and yes, it was hideous. And no, it's not happening anymore. Gosh, one of the things we can do is we can awaken to the present moment and to an enjoyment of the life that we've managed to create, even around having been abandoned. Who are our good friends? Who do we love? Do we have a companion animal that we love? Do we have a partner or children who we love? Has an abandoning parent done some emotional work and come back into the relationship and is now more available? We become open to new availability as we do our time travel work and our healing. But we can't just chiropractically move ourselves from one state to another. It takes that resonant response. It takes the growing of the neurons that can hold the emotional experience.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love what you just said about being open to new availability. That's so beautiful. Right? All of us being open to new availability. So how can we time travel to our whole life?
Well, so one of the things that can happen as we begin to talk about time travel is somebody will say, well, sure, I was abandoned when I was 3, but then the abandonment continued. There was no resource in sight for the rest of my life. I'm still abandoned, and it's not about the amygdala having no sense of time. It's the real truth. In which case, what we want to do is to kind of, instead of time traveling just to the first moment, we want to kind of make really big arms for the time travel and to acknowledge the truth of our experience through the whole time span. And so it's like the same kind of resonant response, but it's got bigger arms, and there are many more abandoned selves that are being held in our embrace.
I love that. And you've kind of touched on this, but I'm curious, for people who haven't had, let's say they didn't experience a physical abandonment from someone they loved, a caretaker or what have you, but they definitely had more, let's say, emotional abandonment, right? Parents not being able to be there for them. Is there anything else you could say specifically to that?
Yeah. What I'd like to say about that is that this can be one of the most confusing kinds of abandonment to begin to heal from, because we're like, I feel abandoned, but my mother was there every day of my life. She was making my lunches. She was making dinner. She was having me do my homework. How could I feel so abandoned? It doesn't make sense to people that they feel so abandoned. But what's happening in this case is that we have a hunger for a real relationship. And if our mom stays in her instrumental brain, if, for example, she has too much trauma to be able to open the door to her relational brain, because that's where trauma lives. As soon as we try to open the door to relationship, we're opening the door to trauma. So as soon as we, as soon as our mother tries to be relational, her trauma shuts her down, which means then that we are emotionally abandoned. So just having this much information can often be hugely helpful and validating to people who are so confused about why they feel so abandoned when their mom was always there. Or it's almost like we're hungry for our mom's souls, or we're hungry for a partner's soul. We want their vulnerability. We want them to come through. We want to know their heart, and their heart is trapped and unavailable because of trauma. So this is our dilemma, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on that, because that was something that I uncovered for myself in my own childhood, related to my parents, is that hunger, and always wondering why I always felt that like neediness, right? Like we talked about before, and that kind of grasping, even though maybe in the moment, or right, whatever my experience was, they were right there, but I always still had that feeling of wanting and right, in completion or something. So really important for people to recognize if that's their experience as well. I'm also curious, like to give people some great tools to use. Like, let's say someone is fearing abandonment. So it's because of their past experiences. They're in maybe a romantic partnership, or they have friends, and they're always worried they're going to be abandoned. Like they can really feel that fear in them. Any thoughts about, in that moment, how to manage that?
In the moment, it's hard. We just need to kind of grab ourselves and hang on, because we'll do all kinds of intense things when we have that fear. We'll yell. I've thrown shoes in public, across a street. We get to be just really, affectionate with ourselves for having thrown the shoes. But in terms of, kind of helping ourselves in the larger picture, we can begin to work with our contracts, unconscious contracts, like I will never let myself be abandoned again, or I will believe I'm always on the edge of being abandoned, or I will never let anyone close to me in order never to be abandoned again. Or so if we have one of these type of contracts, they can be very intensely disruptive of real connection. If we have an I will never let anyone abandon me again, and we're starting a relationship, and our partner needs to go on a business trip, then, we might throw shoes. Right. And it doesn't help the relationship. The person has to go on a business trip to keep their job. So beginning to work with the contracts and the original trauma both start to decrease the reactivity. So the time travel to the originally abandoned self with a lot of validation. Yes, this did happen. Sometimes people time travel and they just want to do reassurance, like it's going to be okay. No, that's not what we need in the time travel. We need, do you feel terror? We need to name the truth of what's happening. And then with the contract work, that's all of book 2. And you can, there's, it's almost like when we make it official and we hear ourselves saying it, I will never allow myself to be abandoned again in order to survive, probably, right, no matter the cost to myself. And then we go, okay, that was a good contract when we were little, it saved our lives. Do we still need it now? And then we get to say, maybe not so much.
Right.
And
that's a big one.
Yeah.
what you just mentioned, because so many of us can stay in, right, really unhealthy scenarios because of that fear, right, of abandonment and not wanting to have that ever happen again. And yeah, I always like go back to a few relationships I had in my past where I'm like, I just spent years and years and years with people that like intuitively I'm like, nope, it wasn't right. I knew it from the beginning, but
Yeah.
6 years later, there I was.
Right. And sometimes there's this interesting sort of turning inside out of it. If we were abandoned, we don't want to abandon anybody else.
Right.
So we won't leave somebody no matter how miserable we are and they are. We'll just kind of stick it out so that we're not replicating that original experience of abandonment. And that, of course, makes it our response to life more rigid than it needs to be.
Right.
We want more fluidity and choice and to choose really good things for ourselves and for other people.
Yeah, that's a really great point to think about it in that way for AVAIYA students watching. If you've had that experience, flipping it around and recognizing that you don't want to hurt anybody if you've been hurt. And yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I like that. So let's talk a little bit about your gift and your offer. Since
thank you.
We got a couple buttons below everyone that links over to Sarah's site.
The free gift is the class Developing Self-Kindness, an introduction to finding and awakening and living with your resonating self-witness with Sarah Peyton, who's me. And and the resonating self-witness is exactly what we've been talking about, Andy. It's this part of the self that gradually gets to turn toward the amygdala, in a way, the abandoned self, and reach for the abandoned self. And then we've got an offer of a 2-for-1 enrollment in Sarah's Intro to Resonant Language, which is a self-study where you get to go through with worksheets and videos and work together with a friend and start to learn resonant language, which is what you need to reach for the little part of yourself. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for both of those. And again, everyone, those buttons are below and we highly recommend you check those out. Sarah obviously is amazing, which is why she's always coming back and talking.
Aww.
So do you have any last insights, Sarah, before we wrap up?
I always like to say that if we have a lacerating self-critic, then we need to know that it's not truth that it's telling us. It's this trauma story. It's not truth, it's trauma.
Beautiful. Wonderful last words. Thank you so much for doing this as always. And thank you, AVAIYA students, for showing up for yourself, for being here with us in this discussion. And we will see you all again very soon. Take care. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this latest class with Sarah Peyton. She was back with us talking about how to reclaim your abandoned self. I always enjoy connecting with Sarah. She has such a loving, warm, resonating way about her, and I hope that you really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. We talked a lot about, obviously, abandonment, the different effects that abandonment can have throughout our life, and the importance of traveling back through time, but maybe not all at once, right? Maybe not all at once to go reclaim that abandoned self, but to do it with baby steps and to be compassionate with yourself and do it at a pace that works for you and your nervous system and your body and all of that kind of stuff. So also just a thing I wanted to mention too was we talked about unresonated with emotions. These are emotions that maybe we haven't had someone tell us, oh, I felt the same way when my parents got divorced when I was a kid, right? It's to have these emotions within us that no one has maybe shared with us, or we don't know that they've shared with us. And that really is just the importance of community and connecting with others and being heard by others and hearing other people's stories, which is so important. And also just so important that you're part of this AVAIYA University community. So we thank you so much for being here. And if you enjoyed this conversation with Sarah, she has many, many other masterclasses here at AVAIYA University that she's been a part of, including overcoming anxiety and depression, breaking free from trauma, overcoming PTSD, breaking free from codependency, and several more. So if you're interested in learning more about her work and these different topics, you can find those classes at the homepage of AVAIYA.com. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.